Today is President Biden's 98th day in office, which of course means that his first 100 days winding down. Ever since the days of FDR, the first 100 days have been used as a benchmark of sorts to gauge the progress of a new president. It's also the period of time when a president can historically get a lot of things done. The latest numbers show that the majority of Americans so far like the job that Joe Biden's doing. He's 14 points above water, and for the sake of comparison, Donald Trump, he was underwater by double digits at the same point in his first and only term. He never even got above 50%. And as you can see, Barack Obama, George W. Bush also had high marks from the American public during their first 100 days. Now, when you look at the issues, President Biden, he's getting the strongest numbers for his response to COVID, his handling of the economy, how he's uniting the country, as well as race relations. He is underwater, however, when it comes to taxes and spending, China, guns, as well as the border. Now, President Biden will speak about many of those issues and more when he addresses a joint session of Congress tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Eastern. He's expected to give an update on the COVID pandemic, the vaccinations, push for infrastructure, and also discuss the social welfare programs he wants to enhance. I want to bring in our guest right now to discuss, David Levinthal. He's a senior Washington correspondent for Insider. He's kind enough to give us a few minutes. And you know, David, I just went through some of the math here on how he's doing as a frame of reference, how Trump was doing at this point 4 years ago. He's caught some folks off guard, has Biden, in that he seems to be all gas, no brakes so far. And historically, at least, from every historian I talk to, they say that's what you got to do. You don't know what the first midterms are going to look like, let alone if you're going to get 4 more years.
Well, Joe Biden doubly did not have a choice to let off the proverbial gas. Number one, he had an opportunity legislatively in that he has control democratically of the House and the Senate, plus he has the White House. So if you are ever going to put forward an aggressive policy agenda, you got a full house, you got a full deck. You do it in your first 100 days, or at least you set the foundation to do so. And then, of course, the pandemic. Okay, we're still in the midst of an incredibly terrible situation, and so many people across the country and across the world looking for any sign that we are going to be able to get out of it in 2021, which is why you saw Joe Biden be so ambitious and put such a marker out there for his first 100 days to increase vaccines, increase vaccination, get this country on a path to effectively getting that herd immunity that we all talk about, where we can think about resuming some sort of semblance of a pre-pandemic normal life again.
To that end, one of the things that those within the Obama administration acknowledged, if they had to do it over again, they would have liked a mulligan, was after they got the ACA through, maybe reflective of the commander-in-chief at the time, but they didn't want to self-promote. They wanted the legislation to speak for itself. And if you look historically, people now have a much more favorable opinion of the ACA than they even did at the moment. Is it because of COVID that we really haven't seen a sales job on the stimulus, and to a certain degree, more of a granular of what this, if they were able to get this infrastructure plan come through? It can't just be from the podium, can it?
Correct. There has to be a deliverance of the goods, so to speak. And I think we saw that with the stimulus package, that this was something that, at least in this current day and age, with the body politic, with the electorate so polarized, that was about as wildly popular a piece of legislation as you're going to be able to get under these circumstances. So there wasn't necessarily going to have to be much of a sales job done, in the sense that many people wanted it. They were hurting. They were desperate to get aid. Cities and states around the country were also likewise desperate. So put that all together, and Joe Biden doesn't have to go on a national tour for that. Where he is probably going to have to do a much better sales job, or at least a much more aggressive sales job, is on the infrastructure front, the separate bill that we're going to be talking about probably for months ahead throughout this entire year, where Democrats and Republicans both, there is the willingness to move forward with a big, bold infrastructure package. But really right now the question is, how do you define infrastructure? Is it just the traditional trappings of roads and highways and bridges and ports, or is it going to be something much more expansive, as Joe Biden and many Democrats would like it, to include broadband, technology, lots of stuff that if we were talking about infrastructure, say, 30 years ago, it would be just ridiculous that we were even just entertaining that notion.
You know, David, I'm curious. Joe Manchin, the Democrat, at least most of the time from West Virginia, Is he driving the Biden folks nuts, or privately, would they be happy to settle on 50 cents on a dollar for a lot of these proposals? Before we even talk infrastructure, the $15 minimum wage. What do the Biden folks, do they look at Manchin as somebody who's going to help protect their center flank, or is he really holding things up as that 50th senator?
Well, Joe Manchin, I think under many circumstances is the most powerful member of the U.S. Senate, given that he is a conservative Democrat or a moderate to conservative Democrat. He is not just going to simply take what Joe Biden says he wants and run with it. He is very much going to be his own man, his own senator over these next 2 years. So, yeah, of course, he's a thorn in the side for Joe Biden and for the White House. But by the same token, too, he's somebody who can definitely be a bridge to the Republican Party to, in the best circumstances for Democrats, pull some Republicans away of the Democrats on especially bipartisan issues or potentially bipartisan issues such as infrastructure. So consider Joe Manchin to be Joe Biden's biggest double-edged sword, and that he's in a way going to be treated as such by the White House.
You know, I've learned that no matter what polls say, it doesn't mean it's going to move Washington. Certainly not as much as the public thinks. We were talking not long ago about universal background checks. You got more than 90% of the American public wants it, but still it has not moved from a grinding halt in Washington in recent memory. On issues of, I'm not talking seismic gun control changes, but things that the public clearly wants, and then on racial justice issues, what can Biden realistically do, and how much following will he get on Capitol Hill beyond just the base Democrats?
If you're looking for really, truly dramatic seismic changes of the sort that would require a supermajority in the Senate for Democrats, given the current numbers, to go from the 50 senators that they have to the 60 senators that they would need to pass comprehensive gun reform legislation, gun control legislation, comprehensive immigration reform legislation. They just don't have the votes right now. So they can do this because of some quirks of Senate rules and regulations on spending bills, which is why you don't have the filibuster factoring into some dollars and cents issues that are being dealt with in the U.S. Senate. But on issues of guns, issues of immigration, and others that are particularly thorny and decidedly non-bipartisan issues, they're just going to have to wait until 2022, more or less, to figure out if they can just change the balance of the U.S. Senate. And the only other alternative is to attempt to kill the filibuster. But then that goes back to Joe Manchin, the Democrat from West Virginia, who is just steadfast against the notion or the act of getting rid of the filibuster. He sees it as a good thing for the Senate and a good thing long-term for the country, and that, in his opinion, it brings the two parties together. But many of his Democratic colleagues, of course, disagree vehemently with him.
You know, David, obviously, as we all know, COVID has restricted travel, but that's not just restricted to guys like you and me. It has also obviously kept the president on terra firma here in the States. When you contrast for the last 4 years, which was this nationalistic, the hell with the world, with what Biden has already done, and more than just extending a fig leaf to our former allies, explain to the audience why that's not just optics, why it matters, our standing in the world?
Well, I was struck by a poll that came out just a few hours ago from Morning Consult that looked at all of the different countries around the world that are prime allies, and then some that are not so much. And almost in every case, whether it was Japan, whether it was Australia, Canada, Mexico, you name it, the esteem that those countries, the populations of those countries, held the U.S. in today versus Election Day just a few months ago, it had gone significantly up. So it matters because when it comes to trade, when it comes to military affairs, when it comes to cybersecurity. I could rattle off 10 issues. Foreign relations matter. They may not be the thing that's going to be first on everyone's mind day in and day out when you're dealing with pocketbook issues, economic issues, when you're dealing with safety issues, and all the other domestic things that we're having to deal with, say nothing of the COVID-19 pandemic. But when you have a dust up with another country, or one country invades another, or you have a health crisis such as the one that we're having right now, these foreign relations do matter. They matter significantly, and that's even without talking about the very, very deep and intertwined economic relations that will absolutely factor into those domestic issues in a way that floats a little bit below the surface. So if you care about those things, then you're probably pretty happy with the results in the first 100 days for Joe Biden on the foreign front, separate and apart from the domestic front.
And last thing, when they close the door, do you think Biden looks at Ron Klain and says, we're doing pretty good? Forget the polls. Or does he say, my God, that was a low-hanging fruit. It's going to be that much harder going forward?
You know, I think there's, in talking with Biden White House officials and people who are close to the president, I do get the sense that they are pleased with the way things are going, but know full well that this is just the first 100 days, or there's going to be a 200 days and a 300 days and a 600 days. And ultimately, history is going to judge Joe Biden on what he's able to do over the 4-year term and not just the first 100 days of it, and that they have an incredibly long, difficult road ahead for them if they want to get any or all of their policy agenda items put forward and dealt with and ultimately passed either in full form or compromise form. And that's going to take a lot of political skill. That is going to take a lot of compromise. And it's also going to take a lot of wrangling and sometimes some pugilism too with Republicans in order to do it. They're not going to get everything that they want. They are not going to be able to get the whole enchilada. But in the end, Biden is definitely shooting for a very high target and not something that's going to be just a pedestrian. He wants to have a 4 years that is going to be one for the history books. And that's very clear from the first 100 days.
David Levinthal, good stuff. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Hey, thank you.
Up next, another edition of a segment we call So Right They're Wrong. This time, we're going to call out the right wing about lying about, of all things, hamburgers. We'll explain after the break.